Hey there, my name's Dosh, and you might know me from feats such as this, and whatever the heck this thing is. As you may have gleaned from the clickbaity title, I'm an engineer, a computer engineer more specifically, and that makes me rather qualified to talk about today's subject, Zachtronics games. With their final game being released only a couple months ago, now's as good a time as any for a big retrospective. Zachtronics was founded in the year 2000 by the titular Zach Barth. In the beginning, it was mostly small projects made with Adobe Flash, with the most standout example being Infiniminer, seeing as it was the main inspiration for Marcus Persson to create Minecraft, but eventually they would evolve into a notorious developer of puzzle games. Now, Adobe Flash was killed in 2021, and honestly, good riddance, but it does render most of these early games unplayable without jumping through a lot of hoops. If you do play them, you'll find that a lot of those early ideas end up reappearing in later Zachtronics games. As much as I'd like this video to be a full expose on the beautiful mind of Zach Barth, I've got things I should be doing, so we're going to limit this video to the 8 mainline Zachtronics games, or the so-called Zach-likes. If you've ever complained about the brain-dead puzzles in AAA games, boot up a Zachtronics game and find out whether or not you really mean it. I was going to do this on tierlists.com, but they wanted to hack into my Twitter account in exchange for the privilege to move a bunch of pictures around a chart. So we'll be doing this in Photoshop instead. I'm gonna go in order of release date, which makes our first game SpaceChem. In SpaceChem, you do chemistry in space. Yeah, big shocker, right? The story of SpaceChem is fairly minimal, something relegated almost entirely to the single pages of text that you'll unlock as you solve more puzzles. It's minimal, but it provides something very important, and that is context. Why are we doing chemistry in space? Mostly because it's our job, though we'll be no doubt forced to deal with some things that are definitely not in the job description. It provides an important layer of motivation and context to what would otherwise be simple puzzles in a vacuum. I'd probably feel a lot more motivated to solve Sudokus if each one gave out a new page of the Winds of Winter. I guess the presence of plot and backstory is also why Honey Pop has 6 times the reviews of Bejeweled 3 on Steam, but I digress. Conceptually, the puzzles are easy. You're given some atoms from the left side of the screen and told to turn them into the desired product and drop it on the right side of the screen. To do this, you're given these circles called Waldos, but instead of those crappy books at the library that only give you 1 Waldo at a time, SpaceChem gives you 2, and you don't even need to look for them. Yes, I know it's from a short story by Robert Heinlein, but that's not nearly as funny. Anyway, they travel along these rails and execute instructions whenever they pass over them. At first, you'll just be grabbing atoms and moving them to the right side of the screen, but eventually you'll need to create bonds between atoms, make multi-step factories, fuse atoms to make heavier elements, and even... One thing I really like is how you can make every element all the way up to Mittenurium if you're so inclined, even though you don't even use half the periodic table. Now, conceptually, the puzzles might be easy, but practically not so much. Atoms can't leave the 8x10 space of the reactor, and they can't collide with each other either. It's not so bad early on, but it becomes a major hurdle when the game asks you to make a product half the size of the whole reactor. You'll get some more tools later, like sensors and flip-flops to help better control the Waldo's path, but it's normal to spend multiple hours on just one of the later levels. The game has a lot of complexity that emerges from just a handful of simple instructions, which all come together to make the game fantastically open-ended. It's one of the few puzzle games that feels like you can really approach it however you want. The game even shows how your solution stacks up against everyone else's, so you can feel either inadequate or smug depending on which side of the histogram you end up on. By the way, just so you know I'm legit, here's the level I submitted 11 years ago that got added to the optional levels pack. So, where do we rank it? The game's over 10 years old, and playing it today, it lacks the polish of the later Zachtronics games. It's got a couple quality of life issues. Learning the hotkeys to place all the instructions is a necessity, and there are many instructions that you can only access by right-clicking them after you've placed them. If you've already got a direction marker going one way and you want to change it, you can't just place the different direction, you need to delete the old one manually or change it with the right-click. That being said, it holds up pretty well, and its capacity for deep problem-solving rivals many of the later Zachtronics titles. I may have called the story simplistic, but for a puzzle game, the narrative is woven surprisingly well with the gameplay. For all those reasons, I'm going to put it in A, but I might move it later. It also gets an S for difficulty, and I dare you to prove me wrong. Now that you've seen one Zachtronics game, you're going to start noticing a few patterns from here on out. And on that note, next up is Infinifactory. Infinifactory is the only 3-dimensional Zachtronics game, unless you count Infiniminer, which is where it gets half of its name. Unsurprisingly, the other half is because you're making factories. As soon as you boot up the game, you are immediately abducted by aliens and put on an assembly line. After listening to some gibberish, they throw you in your very own gamer pod. If you want to eat, you'll need to build some factories for them. And if you keep completing them, along the way you'll meet plenty of people who obviously weren't as smart as you. The gameplay itself is similar to SpaceChem. You've got a certain set of inputs that you need to manipulate into the finished product in order to progress. Instead of bonding atoms, we're welding blocks together, and instead of Waldos, we've got conveyor belts. Just like SpaceChem, the further you progress, the more tools you'll unlock in the form of different blocks. At first it'll just be you and some conveyors, but eventually you'll get pistons, sensors, and eviscerators. The difficulty curve is steady, and beyond the tutorial stages, it rarely asks you to do something you haven't done before. Though you could say that telling a toddler to run a marathon isn't asking them to do anything they haven't done before, since it's just putting one leg in front of another, but what I'm trying to say is that it gets complicated. There's a popular psychological term that's been floating around recently called chunking. Basically, it's the human concept of grouping similar pieces of information together to make them easier to recall later. And I can't think of anything better than a Zachtronics game to exemplify this concept. You might struggle at first to weld 3 blocks together, but once you learn how, you stop thinking of that solution as the individual blocks themselves, and instead as simply the thing that welds 3 blocks together. And then when a later level asks you to weld 3 blocks together and then put a thing on top of them, you've already got half of it solved before you've even placed a single block. Even later on, you might end up combining several of these chunked solutions in a single level. Obviously, stacked contextual knowledge is part of any game, but when it comes to puzzle games, it is the game. Okay, ranking time. The 3-dimensional environments make the solutions very satisfying to watch, especially in the later levels, and it's very polished as well. However, this means that editing the level takes more time, seeing as you need to build in 3 dimensions and fly around to peer at it from all different angles. Unlike the other titles, you can't see the whole field at once either, so thinking through your solution isn't as straightforward. That being said, the game is much easier than SpaceChem and much more approachable. And you can tell because it lets you do stupid things like this. For the Zachtronics series, it's a great entry-level game. And that's why it's going in A rank, right above SpaceChem. And as for difficulty, we'll put it in B. There's no such thing as an easy Zachtronics game, but as far as Zachtronics games go, it's one of the easier ones. Now it's time to move on to TIS 100. TIS 100 stands for Tessellated Intelligence System. And you know the game's serious when it immediately gives you a manual to read. In SpaceChem, you solve puzzles based on chemistry, in Infinifactory you solve puzzles based on assembly lines, but in TIS 100, you program an assembly language. Yeah, you've got limited instruction space and parallel cells, but it's still programming an assembly. Now, compared to most channels, I'm willing to bet that a lot of you probably already know what assembly language is, but it's about as low level as you can get and still be called a programming language. Your processor has something called an ISA, or Instruction Set Architecture, which describes all of the instructions and registers that allows this software to interface with the hardware. The stuff that uses this architecture is called machine code, and that looks like this. Yeah, so to save themselves from needing to look at that, programmers created something called assembly code, which is essentially the machine code except it's got words so humans can actually understand it. For example, the MOV opcode here simply moves some value into the ACC register so we can hold on to it for later. Why am I explaining all of this? Because it is very relevant to Zachtronics games. Now, assembly language varies from processor to processor, and in TIS 100, we're using the ISA of a fictional processor with massively parallel, non-uniformly interconnected heterogeneous nodes. Those are the game's words, not mine. Your first reaction to listening to all that might be, is this even a video game? But yes, it is a video game. The visuals are extremely minimal, it has no music, and the gameplay is basically just programming, but it is a game. Compared to SpaceChem and Infinifactory, the story is quite lean. You're some computer expert who receives the titular TIS 100 from their uncle and you need to rewrite the corrupted code segments in order to uncover the secrets of this strange device. The main puzzle of TIS is essentially moving and transforming data between nodes. The limited space for instructions forces you to distribute your operations and coordinate them accordingly, which requires a fair amount of brain power. These limitations are what makes it a puzzle game instead of just programming an assembly, but it's still basically just programming an assembly. But where will it end up on the chart? It might sound intimidating, and while it does help, you don't need to be a programmer to pick up TIS 100. The assembly is quite simplified, and once you figure out the basics, you're good to go. Simple, however, does not mean easy, and you'll figure that out rather quickly. This is the kind of programming language where telling if one number is bigger than another takes several minutes of effort. Low-level computer architecture is my specialty, and it still took me over an hour each to beat the later levels. As for its simplicity, it does provide a more distilled puzzle experience, but it's still visually unexciting. Also, I'm not going to dock at any points for this, but I have an eye condition that makes this game physically unbearable to look at. I really would have liked something to change it from just stark white on black. All that said, I think it belongs in B tier overall, and S tier for difficulty. It's harder than SpaceChem too. Now it's on to Shenzhen IO. It's called Shenzhen IO because the game takes place in Shenzhen, and it's all about microcontrollers and digital signal processing. The plot of this game is that you studied to become an engineer, but all the engineering jobs left your country, and so you moved to China to get a job in your field. It's pretty unrealistic, but we'll suspend our disbelief. Technically, it's set in future Shenzhen, though. All of the story is provided through these emails with other employees and clients. Through these emails, you're given tasks like designing a microcontroller to put in a vest for laser tag. I appreciate that all of the puzzles try to have real-world applications, and seeing the conversations between employees is enough incentive to struggle on, even if the story isn't as intense as SpaceChem or Infinifactory. Shenzhen takes more after TIS than it does something like SpaceChem, and you can tell immediately because we've got another manual to read. The manual is much more extensive this time as well, and has several pages dedicated to singular puzzles in the campaign, which is probably why they encourage you to print it. Shenzhen also uses its own assembly code, but it's much less restrictive than TIS, seeing as it allows comparisons between two values and conditionals without requiring jump statements. The space for instructions is still limited, but different components can fit different amounts of code as well as input and output ports, and you're able to move data between components using wires. Space on the board itself is also restricted, and routing the wires is a major part of the challenge. Your goal is to take the waveforms from each of the input pins and turn them into the appropriate waveforms for each of the output pins. As far as actual electronics go, it's heavily simplified, seeing as you're not dealing with anything like voltages, resistances, or resonators. But believe me, that's a good thing. If you want to know more about that, there's a series on YouTube called Shenzhen in Real Life. Anyway, unlike the other Zachtronics games, there's no score for how fast your solution runs. Instead, you have power and cost, which is more appropriate for microcontrollers. There's also solitaire, but my experience with it is mostly coming to it after getting tired of a difficult level and moving the cards around randomly until I win, because I don't have any leftover brain power. This is one of the harder ones for me to rank. Shenzhen IO has a lot of improvements over TIS, but compared to TIS, I felt like the actual programming part of it often takes a backseat to figuring out where the damn wires are supposed to go. The space is very limited, and when you're forced to keep all of your X-bus and IO pins separate, you'll run into space issues quite often. Thankfully, the game has a vertical wire bridge to jump over other wires, but for some reason doesn't have a horizontal one or even a longer one. The pins never seem to be where you want them to be either. It would have been nice if you could change pin arrangement, but you just need to deal with it. That being said, the large number of different components gives you a lot of flexibility, but it still feels constrained in ways even SpaceChem didn't achieve. There's a nice little graphic at the bottom right of most levels that shows you what your microcontroller's doing, and that's cool. I'm going to put Shenzhen in high B tier above TIS 100 and give it S tier for difficulty. It's about as hard as TIS, but I'm gonna lean ever so slightly towards TIS being harder. The fact that we're 4 games in and 3 of them are already in S tier difficulty should tell you something. Anyway, Opus Magnum. You shouldn't need me to tell you what Opus Magnum means. Opus Magnum is heavily based on the original Flash game, The Codex of Alchemical Engineering, and accordingly it's all about alchemy. Unlike all the other games where you're playing some nameless engineer, in this game you play as the legendary super autist Antaeus Vaya, top of his class at the College of Alchemical Engineering. Finally, a character I can relate to. You're hired to serve as head alchemist to some noble family in this magic meets machines type setting. By using the power of the transmutation engine, we can turn alchemical reagents into many different useful products. Something so amazing that Antaeus put off learning it until right before graduation. This is great because not only does it show you Antaeus' power level, but it also gives an excuse to explain all the components. The first task you're given as head alchemist is to turn lead into gold, something so simple Antaeus actually takes offense. But as usual, the further you get, the more complicated the requests become. Everything plays on a hexagonal grid, and your task is to manipulate things with pistons and arms. Unlike Shenzhen, you can put the inputs and outputs wherever you want, and there's even tracks you can use for even more control over the arms. The reagents are most commonly earth, wind, water, and fire, but there's also alchemical salt, vitae, and Mars, as well as a handful of metals. Appropriately, many of the puzzles involve transmuting reagents into other reagents. Gameplay-wise, it's most similar to SpaceChem as we bond little circles together in a two-dimensional space, but in spirit it's actually closer to Infinifactory. There's no limit on size and there's no limit on instructions. As long as you don't smash two things into each other, anything goes. You could solve every puzzle with a single piston on a rail if you were so inclined. You'll unlock a few new things, but it's all mostly the same. Once again, cost is part of the score, but cycles are back. With how lenient the game is, solutions that maximize cost, size, or cycles all look radically different, but building for speed is usually the default. When you're exhausted from being an alchemical genius all day, you can play Sigmar's Garden, which is a lot less intellectually demanding than the solitaire from Shenzhen and very aesthetic. The game itself is very aesthetic. But how will it be ranked? I'm just going to be upfront, I love the setting and the aesthetic. Maybe I'm biased because of my own affinity for fantasy, but it looks great. The story is well written without overextending itself and is well suited to the setting. Making the player an actual character also allows me to vicariously enjoy Anateus' smugness, and it encourages me to build better since I'm out here representing my main man. It's very accessible and very polished. For all those reasons, and fitting to its name, Opus Magnum goes in S tier. With the infinite size and instruction length, as well as the flexibility of the arms themselves, I'm going to put it in C for difficulty. If someone came up to me, which would be unlikely since that would require leaving the house, and asked me which Zachtronics game they should play, I would point at this one. Following in Opus Magnum's footsteps is...
Exapunks.
The name comes from an in-universe device called an execution agent, or Exa. You're the titular punk. In Exapunks, you're some shut-in nerd locked up inside their room. I know it's tough to relate to, but just use your imagination.
Looks like you definitely need it.
The setting is an alternate year 1997, where a bizarre virus called the phage is infecting people.
I do have a source.
People infected with the phage slowly start turning into junk computer parts. And guess what? You've got the phage. The only treatment is an extremely scarce and extremely expensive medicine. You try to make some money online, but it's clear filling out online surveys just isn't enough. Suddenly an AI gets in contact and makes you an offer you can't refuse. One hack, one dose.
You'll need to start hacking again, though.
And so you're forced to dust off that black hat and return to your hacker past. Guess what? It's got another manual for you to read, and it's also got its own assembly language. Its tutorial is much better than Shenzhen's, though. This time we're using assembly to program individual exas in order to infiltrate networks, mess with files, and generally wreak all kinds of havoc. The manual is actually an in-universe magazine called Trash World News, written by your old friend who goes by the handle Gast.
On your terms.
It's a great detail, and it sells the setting well. There's a lot more instructions for you to learn, and you'll be referencing the manual a lot, so the game's suggestion of printing it out yourself isn't unreasonable. Compared to TIS and Shenzhen, X's are extremely powerful. There's no limit on instructions, and you can start with as many X's as you need. There's also more flexibility with registers, and you can even duplicate X's, which really makes you feel like you're infecting an entire network. Though, like any good hacker, you need to leave no trace. You start small at first, hacking the local pizza shop to send you a free pizza, but pretty soon you're hacking government documents and even your own phage-infected body. Most of the story is given through the AI and the occasional cutscene, but there's also an IRC channel that you've been lurking in for years filled with other hackers. Occasionally they'll react to your latest hack, and it might be a small reaction, but it's enough to keep me motivated. There's also Russian Solitaire, and if you manage to hack past the region locking software, there's this little arcade game called Hack Match. It's a good break from hacking and reasonably fun, but playing it too long makes my fingers hurt. Getting a score of 100,000 is the rarest Steam achievement for this game, so obviously I've got it. Okay, onto the chart it goes. Exapunks might seem intimidating, but compared to the other two games with a manual, it's much more approachable. The visuals of physically switching between networks, picking up files, and moving around exas really helps with the connection between code and result. You don't need to be a programmer to understand it, though it certainly helps. That being said, it's not easy and many of the levels will leave you scratching your head and triple-checking the manual. The setting is great and the game is very polished. The 90s hacker aesthetic is done expertly and is perhaps the only game that justifiably makes you feel like a hacker. With the unlimited instruction length, you're free to make the solution as terrible as you want, which is probably what makes it most similar to programming in real life. Like this solution, where I couldn't figure out how to terminate the last exa without redoing the whole thing, so I just made an extra one that waits 1500 cycles then shoots it in the face. That's why I'm putting it in S rank, right behind Opus Magnum, and giving it an A rank for difficulty. The game's not easy, but if you enjoy a good challenge, you won't be disappointed.
Exapunks.
Also, I haven't been making much mention of the music, but all of the Zachtronics games have incredible soundtracks made by the incredibly talented Matthew S. Burns. It never feels out of place, and I've never had to turn it off to hear myself think. Well, 6 down, 2 to go. It's Molek-Syntez. It's called Molek-Syntez because we're synthesizing molecules. We're back to the minimalist style of TIS 100, but there's no programming here. It feels most like Opus Magnum with its hexagonal grid, but we're back to chemistry and atomic bonds. Organic chemistry, actually, and that means instead of 120 atoms, we're mostly dealing with 4 or 5 atoms. The story is extremely sparse, told entirely with these blocks of text that appear after you beat a certain number of levels. You're some nameless person stuck in the frozen wasteland of 2092 Romania with an old machine called the Molek-Syntez that can synthesize a wide array of chemicals from just a few precursors. Mostly, we're making drugs. Size is limited again, but unlike all the other games, you can place as many precursors as you want. Most of the puzzle is looking at the product you're trying to create and figuring out the best precursors to make it. Instead of arms, you have 6 Waldos that go around the outer rim and manipulate things from there. Hydrogen is the only atom that doesn't take up any space on the board, and it can be added or removed from anything. There's no bond instructions, and instead you need to carefully control the number of hydrogen atoms in order to manage bonds with other atoms. If you want to remove an atom, you'll first need to add enough hydrogen to debond it, and then you can delete it. Not much else to say, really. Oh yeah, it's got solitaire. Anyway, how does Molek-Syntez stack up? As you may have guessed from my terse explanation, it's not as substantial as Opus Magnum or Exapunks. I suppose the minimalist style reflects the harsh Romanian wasteland of the future, but right on the heels of 2 stylistically excellent games, it feels like a step backwards, and this kind of shows the status of Zachtronics at the time. At the risk of sounding super silliest, the main problem I have with this game is that it's just too easy. Only the last few levels posed any kind of challenge. Until then, it's mostly just fiddling around with Waldos, and when you can see the solution right from the start, adding all the instructions one by one suddenly feels like a chore instead of a game. Opus Magnum can also feel easy at times, but it has a great style to back it up, while this doesn't have much. Overall, I'm giving Molek-Syntez a C in quality and a C in difficulty. The reception of Molek-Syntez was rather lukewarm, and when Zachtronics announced that their next game was also their last, I was sad but not surprised. Last Call BBS takes its name after an in-universe bulletin board system, or BBS, called Last Call. In the dinosaur years before social media, we had bulletin board systems. It was a great time before corporations had infected every crevice of the internet. This whole game is dripping with nostalgia for the early days of computing. If you're a Zoomer, you might not understand it, but maybe you should experience it, even if it is just a simulation. Set in the modern day, an old friend started up a BBS for old time's sake, and started sharing some old games on it that you can download and play on your fictional computer, the Z5 Power Lance. It's so dedicated to its setting that it makes you wait several minutes to download a single game. Then when you do download it, you need to wait 15 minutes before downloading another one. Some people complain about this arbitrary waiting, to which I can only say, shut up Zoomer, that was my life. Last Call BBS is more of an assortment of curiosities than one singular game, but it's got plenty of that Zachtronics spirit, so we'll be going through everything individually. First up is Dungeons and Diagrams. It's kind of like Picross, except it's got some rules like monsters are always in a dead end and hallways are always one wide. The numbers on the axes tell the number of walls in that row or column. It's a neat little distraction, but lacking the granularity of Picross, so on the harder levels you'll be doing a lot of trial and error. Still, it's got style, and it should keep you busy for 15 minutes until you can download another one. Next up is Steed Force Hobby Studio. You build Gundams, and that's about it. This is really bringing me back to my childhood, except mine were pre-painted because my parents very justifiably didn't want me getting paint everywhere. As you can see, now that I'm older, my painting skills are immaculate. It's a neat little distraction, but probably not what you're here for. Chip Wizard Professional is presented as a jailbroken copy of a layout design software like Cadence for making microchips, except it didn't cost over $10,000 for a single license. This is the first Zach-like in the bundle. It's very similar to Top, Engineer of the People, one of the original Flash games. Like Shenzhen, your goal is to get the appropriate waveform to the outputs, and to do that, you're all the way down to the silicon layer. It doesn't get any more basic than this. This is what processors look like, except a billion times more complicated. It's fairly simple, but the compact board size makes it difficult. Essentially, your job is to make all the things you take for granted, like AND gates, out of transistors. There's two types, NPN and PNP. Think of them like a gate that's been closed by default or open by default, and by putting voltage into the gate, we can open it or close it. If you want to know more about how N-type and P-type silicon works, enroll in your local college, and after 4 years, that should answer most of your questions. It's pretty hard, especially if you don't know anything about digital logic, but relatively short compared to the other Zachtronics games. Now we've got Hack Match. You might remember it from Exapunks. Well, it's back, except this time it's supposed to be the arcade version. It's bootlegged, so all the instructions are in Japanese. This time there's also a competitive mode where you can fight against NPC opponents with their portrait in the corner, kinda like Puyo Pop or something. It's basically the same as the first, except you need to clear combos or big sections to deal damage. Your opponent will also occasionally lock away your blocks, which you can only then unlock by clearing something next to them. The first two opponents are easy, but Engine Needler will lock out an entire row. He's tough, but you'll get him eventually. And then you reach the fourth opponent, and suddenly she locks out your entire screen. Your first reaction might be to say that that's not fair, and that's because it isn't. The only way to win is to build tons of combos, clear almost your entire screen before her ability, and then win before she can use it again. It took me over an hour, but I felt like I'd need to give up my gamer card if I couldn't beat her. This is also the rarest achievement. On to, X-Bugh? Or is it like X-Blach? Anyway, the Forbidden Path. When you boot it up, you're treated to this killer cracktro. Back in the day, you could tell if your pirated copy was legit or not by whether or not it had a great soundtrack. Retro Ahoy has an incredible video on this topic, so I recommend you go watch that, after this video of course. This game is really out there. It's nestled firmly in the warm, meaty embrace of the genre I like to call fleshpunk. Basically, you're some pilgrim looking for the secret to immortality. The entity there tells you that if you want immortality, you'll need to build your body and work the immortal flesh. And not being one to argue with flesh monsters, you get to work. The main problem with this game is the complete lack of a tutorial, so you're just left wondering what to do. But basically, the stuff at the top are the different steps that your flesh will grow, and the DNA strands on the bottom are the rules that will determine how your flesh grows. It's a bit confusing, but for this one, all you need to do is set the rules for the seed to grow in every direction and then turn into skin. Later on you can add more rules, like turning into skin only when metal is nearby, which means that the solutions can get pretty complicated. It's an interesting game, and I absolutely love the aesthetic. If this was the whole game, just a little bit more fleshed out, hee, I'd be fine. Though, unlike the other Zachtronics games, towards the end it feels less open-ended and more like you're working towards the single correct solution, with some trial and error in between. Regardless, it's a fine addition to BBS's roster. And then there's 20th Century Food Court. This is the biggest of the Zach-likes, and why I saved it for last. It's also got its own cracktro, so you know it's legit. It's made by the fictional developer Zachtronics. The host of the bulletin board goes as far as making fun of it for being just like programming. The story goes, in the future people want to experience the primary importance of the 20th century, eating food. And so the 20th Century Food Court aims to serve as an accurate experience with only the finest robotics. If you've ever wanted to experience life as a phone operator in the 20th century, give this one a shot. Everything is handled through analog cables. Once again, there's no tutorial, and you're just expected to figure out for yourself that you need a scanner to make the dispenser work. Maybe Zachtronics was really trying to emulate the experience of pirating a game without its manual. Anyway, it doesn't look as scary as the Forbidden Path, but it's probably the hardest of them all. But after swapping cables like an audiophile, trying to find the perfect combination that will allow them to hear the musician's thoughts directly, you'll get into it. There is just something viscerally pleasing about plugging one thing into another thing and just having it work, except when it doesn't. Honestly, aside from the lack of a tutorial, I have no real complaints on this one. It's neat. That wasn't the last one, I lied. The real last one is Solitaire. And what can I say? It's Solitaire. BBS comes with 2 versions of Solitaire. If you like Solitaire, you can download the free game on Steam that includes all of Zach's Solitaire variations. And finally, it's time to rank the final game. BBS is an odd one. It's hard to rank what is essentially a collection of several games, especially one wrapped in a layer of nostalgia for classic computing. I could say it lacks focus, but that's so surface level I'm not going to bother outside of this meta-commentary about my conscious decision to mention not mentioning it. It often feels like this game is a retrospective on Zachtronics as a whole, a niche developer for niche people, well-loved but not meant to last forever. A lot of the in-game memos deal largely with the themes of small developers and the struggles they face, now and back then too. Even the in-game BBS is forced to close due to allegations of software piracy. Overall, I will give Last Call BBS the honor of the A rank, right behind SpaceChem and Infinifactory. And as for the difficulty, I'm just gonna put it in every single category since it depends on what you're playing. Well, that's all the Zach likes, and the end of an era. In an interview, Zach said that he had become tired of working on Zachtronics games, that the games themselves had begun to feel samey and that they just weren't exploring anything new. It's an understandable sentiment. Though they're all separate games, every Zachtronics game feels inextricably linked. Puzzles, histograms, linear levels, those are all elements of the Zach-like, and at some point there's gonna be more puzzles than the time to solve them. Zach Barth isn't quitting making games, but he's quitting Zachtronics. Until he comes out with his next game, I can only wonder what's going on in that brain of his, but I can only hope for its success. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years Zach gets an attack of the same nostalgia that made him develop BBS and creates one final Zach-like, but who knows what the future holds. I hope you liked my objectively subjectively correct chart and my little retrospective on one of my favorite developers. It's better to end on a high note than to languish into obscurity, and at the end of the day, Zachtronics games aren't going away. So pick up a Zachtronics game, get frustrated, then put it back down, only to spend the next 8 hours thinking about possible solutions, come back, and start the cycle all over again. Thanks for watching, I'll see you later.